All right. Howdy, y'all. Jack here with the first community engineering call with Animo. Most of you know me as you're on my YouTube channel. If you don't know who I am, watch some of my other videos. I'll let the other crew introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Vanessa. I am Jack's fiance and interested in working on community engineering with him and looking at what we can do better. Yep.
Hi, I'm Gus Bowling. I suppose I fill in the guest panelist role today. I am a computer engineer with a passion for technological literacy and empowering people to use their technology to the greatest benefit to them while being the least exploited by the infrastructure and associated companies. So I am very passionate about empowering people to use their minds and their technology to the utmost.
Yeah, cool. So we're here talking about education, and for those of you on the Animo list, I sent some kind of thought seed videos and some of my own perspectives in an email last week. If you want to be on that email list, jump on my Animo website and get on the email list, and you can join in these chats and put in your 2 cents, and we'll have more than one guest panelist.
I'll have to fill in for now.
I count as a guest too. I just chose to share your lens today.
Very nice.
Yeah. So, education. What did you guys like about your education? What didn't you vibe with as well? What served you? What didn't? How can we maximize the stuff that worked well and minimize the stuff that didn't? And with the understanding that not everybody learns the same way.
Sure. Something that strikes me looking back right now is the mix of things that I learned through guidance as opposed to things that I learned through exploration and more of a personal interest or drive rather than a prescribed course of study. Those aren't totally mutually exclusive, and some things that were kind of assigned to me turned out to be an interest later. But I nonetheless have to reflect on how important it ended up being to be able to both have some things that are, you kind of need to know this and this is foundational, and have other things that are entirely initiated and driven by you and your interests, because that seems to be the longer burning fuel there. Everybody can do homework for a night, but nobody is down to do a lifetime of homework. But they might be interested in a lifetime of like a hobby or a craft or a very specific type of research, like historian or history or what have you. But yes, that's what strikes at me is the mix of prescribed and self-initiated and self-driven work.
So, were you public schooled?
Yes.
That's really interesting, I think, because what you just said, I can't imagine really happening in a public school, at least because I was also public schooled, but I can't imagine having had that myself.
Well, I mean, definitely, I think it is a changing ratio. I think as a younger kid, I definitely needed to have more assigned to me, to be directed and generally kind of led around the place due to ignorance and incompetence on my part, which is just, the default state of a little kid. They don't know anything yet. None of the programs have been installed. So
that's really interesting because my education is somewhat the reverse. I was like largely unschooled. Pretty much the only directive kind of things were some, introductory math, introductory, reading, grammar, kind of understanding the language and understanding,
Yeah.
child's first introduction to logic. And
Introductory, that's a good word.
other than that, I was given total free reign to, okay, maybe not total free reign, because there was some general guidance of like, hey, we should read this history book or whatever. But if I wasn't interested, we'd go do something else.
Sure.
Within reason. So I had much less guidance as a young child, and then more and more as I got older.
Fascinating, because I kind of thought of my experience as slowly converting some of that guidance into self-determination right up until the point of like graduating from college, where there's no more guidance. It's all free reign. And Vanessa, you make an excellent point, because now that I do think about it, the self-direction really didn't become the majority force until college. Public school is very regimented, and given the fact that I'm in computer engineering, it's kind of funny that I didn't even have a chance to take a coding class in high school. So it was very restrictive, especially in regard to what I ended up choosing. And that may be the case for a lot of students these days, because all things being equal, computers are pretty popular and engineering majors are as well. So I am definitely not, my interests are not terribly obscure as relates to our education system, whereas somebody who is more into liberal arts are always a great example, or anything that is typically thought of as more academic or artistic or just not inherently profitable may not be as well represented in our school system, despite still having a perfectly valid place in our society and being worthy of passing it on. Absolutely. So what do you think is valuable in that dynamic? Is it more valuable to provide lots of self-determination early and often? Do we need a trellis to get things started? Is it one of those frustrating situations where all of the answers are, it depends?
I think humans are very inherently interested in learning, right?
I would agree.
We got to this point because we enjoy learning. If the system around us helps us in a way that doesn't damage that inherent desire to learn, right? So my upbringing, I think, was very supportive of desire to learn, even if I was a little behind in some of those fundamentals. When I did get to high school, I caught up very quickly, and I was able to, keep up or surpass most of my classmates, even if I started with a, half step back, because I had ability and desire to learn the things that I didn't yet understand.
Absolutely.
And I think the more we can provide a trellis that is supportive of growth and, maybe pushes you to do some of the uncomfortable things, but for the most part leaves you to your own instinctual desire to develop your cognition.
So
Understanding.
moving forward in the conversation, and since I think you and I agree with this, Vanessa, would you agree that as a premise for argument, humans want to learn? We're generally not opposed to learning something, assuming that it is at least marginally applicable to what we're doing.
Oh yeah, I definitely think that is deeply ingrained in human nature.
And to add to your point, Jack, I think we are always interested in learning, but we're not necessarily always interested in learning everything. There are various subsets, and I think some are almost universal. Everybody wants to know how to make $1 million real fast. Some are very obscure but nonetheless interesting, like Renaissance artwork or more obscure areas. But nevertheless, I think in general, people wish to learn. They wish to learn things that will immediately apply to them, or would apply to them with a little bit of thought. And I think it's a little bit harder to teach people things that are abstract or things that aren't immediately acknowledged as valuable. Hence why we all go, oh, why are we learning this shit in high school? So what do you think about that response? How do we balance the fact that we are de facto curious with the fact that we are also a little bit bored sometimes?
I have some ideas, but
You can go ahead. I'm gonna think about it.
I think not a total blanket solution, but a large step in the right direction would be give people the reasons why they're learning it, the applications before the solution, give people time to struggle with the problem before you give them the solution, and let them walk away. I think those would be the three big steps in making it more apparent why this should be interesting, right? Because in my mind, a lot of this comes down to the relationship from the hormonal system to the hippocampus. And I'm going to be jumping back into old anima for a moment here. The hippocampus writes things into long-term memory when we have an emotional attachment to the things that we have in short-term memory, right? So why you can remember, some random single phrase that a girl you liked in high school said, and you can't remember most of the rest of the semester of the class that was in, is because you are more attached to that person than the subject matter. And that's an emotional response that affects your cognition. So if people are interested, they have an emotional response to the information. And that helps hugely to physiologically write that in your brain.
Sure. So how do we best suit our environment to take advantage of that physiological response?
In what way?
Well, it seems, forgive me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you're suggesting that the way that we feel about an experience has a big effect on the way that we kind of fix that into our memory, and how fresh it stays kind of going forward. So it seems as though there's almost some sort of mechanism there that we could exploit or otherwise, cause to mesh there. Because I can think of lessons which have emotional or personal significance to me, going on a hunting trip with dad, or learning how to tie a fly, or something like that, where there was actually a piece of information that did get passed on.
Definitely.
And it's been very well remembered as a result of kind of, it's kind of like the pedagogical, it's the teaching equivalent of spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down effectively.
Definitely.
So how do we set up our classrooms to reflect that dynamic and to take advantage of it as opposed to fighting it?
I feel like something that is done some places, particularly in like smaller universities, is like smaller classrooms and having it be a more intimate environment, because then you do get to know the people around you and you get to know your teacher and have like more one-on-one interactions. But like maybe doing that in an even more like exaggerated way to develop the relationships more I guess, maybe.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Yep. I think that's definitely something that a lot of educational theorists talk about, and lots of, educators and parents and whatnot looking for small class sizes in schools. And yeah, it's it's one of those logistical issues, but it would definitely help with our educational system a lot.
Yeah. I think it also really depends on the teacher, because having gone to public school, like I remember teachers that I've had who, like, in subjects that I really struggled with, but they really just cared so much and would have me come and work with them, like, one-on-one, and just have a conversation with me instead of saying, like, hey, you're failing, you have to do better, or whatever. It was more a conversation of, like, you do really well in this area and you're struggling in this area, and I'm wondering how we can try something different to help you. And, like, having it be a dialogue between student teacher and teacher rather than, like, lecturing or dictating was, like, that made a huge difference with those classes and those teachers.
Yes. I would agree with these smaller class sizes, and as just a good way to make it a little bit more personal, and also give the teacher kind of a better access to the students and vice versa.
So, kind of in my mind, what I'm thinking about with regard to both of those things and in regard to community is, how can a group of people make that happen in their community? Like, I think if enough people are interested, then they can facilitate that to happen. And I think that happens in homeschooling, but I'm not really sure. I was not homeschooled. Um, but yeah.
So in homeschooling, you get together when you want bigger class sizes, right? Because you have the, one teacher to one kid, or one teacher to four kids, or two teachers to, you have a family dynamic as your kind of baseline unit. But for field trips or bigger projects or things that you want more kids involved in, that's when you get together. So you still end up with a ridiculously high teacher to student ratio, parent to kid ratio, because you've got two or three parents and the other parents dropped off their kids, so you end up with, maybe 10, 12, 15 kids, and that's still a 5-to-1 ratio, which, you see in schools that boast really, high student teacher ratios, or really low student teacher ratios, however that is.
Certainly.
Yeah, but
So,
as far as, like, a community that exists inside the larger structure of the U.S. educational system,
mhm.
yeah, I don't know. I think having personal relationships with mentors and teachers inside and outside of your kind of immediate community is something that our larger societies can, really benefit education. But I don't know how you do that so much in the early years of kind of building a trellis and letting them climb on their own.
Certainly. I think that because we are seeking sort of a constructive uh, idea here, as opposed to just kind of bemoaning the system, and that's kind of what we have to do with the size and the scale of our education system. We can't all just go in and be teachers,
Definitely.
or help the ratio or whatnot. So, uh, kind of in lieu of that, I think that the role kind of falls to each of us to be mindful and be aware of, you know, the little kids in our vicinity. They're oddly enough, I kind of felt like I didn't see any younger kids when I was in high school and college. Now I'm 20 and everybody kind of has their little toddlers or what have you who are around. And, you know, it's not to say that there need be any sort of formal arrangement or whatnot. It's really as simple as riding in the back seat with the toddlers and pointing out, oh, hey, that's what that mountain's called. And do you know what that is? And so it's kind of just being an NPC for all the little kids, basically. You are the giver of quests. You are the teller of long, boring cutscenes and stuff like that. And in kind of a
You
little
can make
way,
my long boring cutscenes more interesting.
yes, but at the same time, you're an adult and you're boring. So, you know, there. And I like the metaphor of an NPC because I think it kind of captures the way that when I was a little kid, the adults were kind of these strange aliens who are big and strange and do complicated things that I haven't learned about yet. And they get less and less like that, and then you turn into one. But
then you realize they weren't really that different from you the
yeah,
whole time.
but from the start at least,
Totally.
their parents are kind of magical, strange beings with poorly understood plans and, you know, intentions and motivations and whatnot. Generally friendly, but just like kind of a separate entity.
Like, as parents and teachers and NPCs for children, explaining your motivations in a way that doesn't seem patronizing, but is just like, yeah, this is what I'm doing, this is why I'm doing it, can help with that a lot. Because I think
Absolutely.
I had a little bit less of that sense because I think my parents talked through everything. They just went about their day being like, this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it. And I asked,
Sure.
can we do this? And they're like, no, and this is why, right? They didn't just say no or yes, and this is why. Usually,
Certainly.
yes doesn't require so much, and this is why. Because the kid's like, yeah, we're doing it.
Yeah. Yep. Of course, the thing is that, you know, you do occasionally have to lie to children, insofar as they may not be able to properly or appropriately understand what's going on. There's a lot of uh, complexity in the world, not necessarily in the home or at school, but occasionally, you know, you do need to soften your explanation a little bit.
Sure, yeah.
But I like the Terry Pratchett idea where he actually invents a concept called lies to children, which is it's the act of giving them some information that will prime the brain almost for the correct answer, because in fact they're not really ready for the full answer. So if a toddler asks you why the sky is blue, it's actually probably a good idea to just say, oh, it's reflecting the sea. Well, that's wrong, but it suggests that it has to do with light and the color of things and even reflection, which is actually, it's not reflecting off water or anything, but reflection and refraction is the ultimate truth. And if you tried to tell a 4-year-old about Rayleigh scattering, you're just going to sound like one of the Peanuts parents going wop 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 wop.
I feel like there's a way to describe why the sky is blue without lying, but with simplifying, right?
Well,
the
that's
light from the sun moves through the atmosphere, and most light gets filtered out. But what we're left is the blue sky, right? You don't need to.
I feel like even then, like even with that,
well, but yeah, that's not correct either, because the blue light isn't what's making it through, because otherwise everything would be blue tinted.
Yes, but it's
so
reflecting the sea, right? Like
well, yes, I'm
level too complicated, but generally in the right direction.
Yeah.
When they're presented with the real answer, it's going to feel more familiar rather than, oh, my dad told me it reflected the sea, but I guess it's something entirely different. Rather than,
Yeah.
oh yeah, my dad said something about the light of the sun and the blue light getting through, but maybe that's not exactly right, right?
And that's quite, I think that's totally reasonable. I think you may even go through various stages of the same lie, because even the concept of light filtering and whatnot might be a little hard to explain to like a kid who's literally just made it to language. So it's stepping stones, and it's stepping stones set up in such a way where I want to call back to what you mentioned earlier, where you kind of said, let them go out and do something. Let them maybe even do it the wrong way so that they can see the benefits of the right way.
Totally.
Like,
Yeah.
oh, that's the technique for shoveling gravel? I've been hurting my back all morning. Like, oh yeah, this is much better. As opposed to if you just kind of start out shoveling gravel the right way, whoop-de-doo,
Yeah, totally.
you're shoveling gravel. I think with lies to children, if I can use that phrase, is the same idea where each step needs to be both intelligible to the child or even the listener, because I still tell lies to adults, frankly, about computers and things. So it needs to be both intelligible to the listener and also give them kind of a seed of truth within that they will build on and branch out of later.
Yeah.
Because they kind of won't, when they don't understand any of it, they won't understand why the right answer is right or the wrong answer is wrong. But if they get familiar with the wrong answer, at least they kind of know what that is. And then you can start picking it apart on a slightly higher level or a more familiar level.
Totally.
And you go, this is what's behind the curtain.
Yeah, so in a similar vein, one of the philosophies that my parents employed in my homeschooling was this idea of learning hooks, where you give a simplified version of the story, or you give a very personal anecdotal kind of version of the story, but that primes the understanding for the fuller grasp. Like, we went through these great books for learning curricula for young children called The Story of the World, and they're little personal stories about people going through a day in the life or important events in human history, from like the ancient world,
Sure.
Bronze Age to modern world. And this gave me I don't remember those stories really. I don't have much concept other than the remembering listening to them with mom, right? Because mom would read them to us. But I do believe that it impacted how I learned history and gave kind of this whole spectrum, and I could kind of fill in gaps and enrich those, the sparse hooks that
Absolutely. Yes, I think that's exactly the idea. It's not so much the thing itself; it's more of a scaffolding, or the trellis, so to speak.
Totally.
So something that kind of caught my ear, I guess, hooked me, earlier in the conversation was what you said, Gus, about not seeing younger kids around.
Mm-hmm.
And I was kind of thinking about that, and like the way that public school is separated, you have these age groups.
Yes.
And I kind of was thinking about it while you guys were talking, and I was thinking about kind of what if that looked different? What if we, for example, there is a school in Pine Creek. It is a one-room schoolhouse type of situation where you've got like tables set up for different age groups that are like all in the same room. Because the area is so small, it's a very rural school, like that's why it's so small. But you end up getting all of those kids in the same room from kindergarten up to like 8th grade and higher. Well, I think definitely 8th grade at least. But you have that range of ages. And I'm like wondering, in my mind, having experienced public school where you have these age groups separated, whether it would be more distracting or like the older groups having influences on the younger groups that you might not necessarily want to like show them yet, or if it would be different in that having all of those groups together, you get to see like different levels of maturity like demonstrated for you to work towards, or learn about different things like depending on what learning level you're at.
I think that's fascinating. That's certainly a more traditional form of school, just by dint of not having these kind of cohorts that we can group together.
There's my dad, one of the people who homeschooled me.
But yeah, and I am interested to understand whether or not that would be effective, just in terms of, we can certainly acknowledge the little reminders that having younger kids around give us when we're in our 20s, but were we really tuned into that earlier in life? And if so, yeah, what is kind of the efficiency gain of having kind of almost kind of peer tutors and kind of, oh yeah, let me show you how to do this sort of dynamics? Frankly, I'm not sure. I think it's an interesting idea and I like it.
Yeah.
And I want to say that it should work because it's traditional.
Yeah. One of the things that Montessori taught was she divided people into grades, but they were 3-year groups, right? So you'd have people who are just encountering the material for the first time, people who have been working with it for a little while, people who are almost done with the material, right? And in that, you've got a longer range of stuff, which gives kids a little more flexibility to master material at their own time, but still kind of a push to be like, this is what you should really know in the next 3 years, which I think is kind of interesting.
Sure.
I think both Steiner and Montessori in the middle of the last century did some really cool looking at education, and they've got some cool insights, and they've got some things that don't really work in the modern age, because they're all very opposed to computers and anything that isn't wood or stone, which it has merit too, but it feels a little harder to justify in the modern world.
Yes, it's well, yeah. At this point, trying to exclude information technology from the classroom is more along the lines of kind of a very contrived and intentional anachronism, like almost like Mormonism, or sorry, not Mormonism, Mennonites and Amish and what have you. Yeah. Just insofar as a lot of the fear mongering and pearl clutching seems to be
totally
addressed by now.
I think part of that is somewhat legitimate on the teacher's standpoint, right? Because we had friends in high school who knew more about computers than our school's IT department did, right? They could fix or damage computers in ways that the IT department didn't even understand existed, right? And when you're in a system like that, giving, especially in kind of the oppositional model of there are teachers and we provide to the students. Having the students at such an upper hand, or even 1% of the student population having a better understanding of this thing than the teachers pretending to teach it, I think could become really problematic.
Sure. I think the overall paradigm shift seems to be that teachers have kind of lost their monopoly as the primary kind of gatekeepers of learning and knowledge. And while that wasn't necessarily always true, there was always libraries and whatnot. We've dramatically lowered the time and effort and just logistical barriers to learning information outside of the classroom. In fact, for certain types of peoples, for certain levels of expertise, I would say that is way, way faster than having somebody teach it to you. Only because once you're kind of self-sufficient, you're on your own, you're going your own speed. So I think in kind of keeping with my earlier thought about kind of being open to more organic, spontaneous kind of learning and teaching experiences, I think that we will need to incorporate that when dealing with this much more decentralized educational environment we find ourselves in. If you can get information from anywhere, you should be prepared to get information from anywhere. You should be able to evaluate that information. And what's more, you should be able to correct kind of the local deficits that you might have with technology. Because you're totally right. It's funny how, it's almost proverbial how even little kids in elementary school can quickly become more proficient with their computers than their school sysadmin is.
Totally.
So yeah, I think we need to stop thinking in terms of kind of this factory model of education where you're going to show up at school and get taught by a small set of people and then leave with that information, have be more or less it, and instead we're moving towards a like iTunes library model of education where you can have some from the iTunes store, you can import some from over here, you got some stuff from Amazon, you got some ripped CDs from your cousin, like, it's very much this collage of knowledge. It kind of always was, but now it's become notably more diverse and notably more available.
I think so. I kind of keep coming back to this in my brain. I'm moving a lot slower. You guys are like, I've got ideas. And I'm like, okay, well, what will the next step of this be? But thinking about the smaller group with the different age groups, I think that it would be interesting to look at that and see that in action with people who were really good at teaching and understanding how to herd children.
Yeah.
But I think it would be interesting because it would develop a lot deeper sense of community in that you guys are all depending on each other and everything that you're learning is going towards what you will be doing in your community in the future. And I wonder a lot of the issues with education, public education in particular, is that it's so focused on the individual. And I think that is really important to some extent. And I'm personally, I feel pretty well prepared for the system that I had to go into as into college. I thought that just looking at my high school education alone, like that did set me up for the system that I was going into. But doing something like this, I think it requires the expectation to either look at our society differently when you're educating and being like, you have your, like, look around you, you're teaching the people who are younger than you and you're learning from the people who are older than you, and kind of all of these different combinations of education and like where you're getting that information, and setting them up in a way that they end up looking at their community and society in a different way that stems from how they were educated.
Sure.
Yeah, one of the things that Steiner emphasizes is group projects, and as simple as like the kids making their lunchtime snack. Like one of the morning activities every day is the teacher has raw material and the kids are given tasks, be it grating carrots or, chopping whatever, and that becomes their, midday snack. And I think there's an additional technology there of food being community building, but I think watching your little thing become part of a bigger thing that all of your peers in your community has contributed to is hugely community building.
Absolutely.
Imagining trying, like, I certainly would not want to be alone in trying to teach like 12 kids of all these different ages. So I'm like thinking about that, and kind of, if that system were to be in place, I wouldn't be doing it alone. I would probably look to the other members of my community to help me teach. And I think something that would be interesting is convincing those people, like, and other people in the community who are less willing, that they do have something to offer that they can teach these kids.
Yes.
And that everybody is able to participate and put something into it. And it really does, like, create this whole web of interaction and, like, dependence in a way, or, like...
Totally.
I think you've struck on one of the things that we ran into in the homeschool group, is there were people who really enjoyed organizing projects, field trips, things, and gathering people around them, or they had a particular curriculum and they wanted to share that with other people, or they had this to offer or that to do, and there were other people who did a great job homeschooling, but they didn't have that desire to include other people in what they were doing, or they didn't have a concept of like, I want to do this project, this series, this class for kids. And there are many right ways, and I think that's inevitable in any group of people. But yeah, I think convincing people who don't know what they want to teach that they want to teach something is
Absolutely
problematic.
Yeah, or people, like, I think it's very possible that they would just be afraid of broaching something like that. And I think if you have a system of teachers that is much wider than like your standard, like 3 math teachers and whatever, then you have kind of a network support system for the teachers who can help you, like, and support you, as well as like for you to bounce ideas off of them and be there if you need them to be there. And like, it doesn't have to be this like, oh no, like, I know you can teach something and you're really smart and you are really excellent at this, and I think it would be awesome if you taught them about whatever, and them being like, oh yeah, I guess I do know that, and then shoving them in a classroom without actually like giving them further support.
Totally.
That wouldn't have to happen. Which I think would need to be explained and acknowledged as like standards too, of like, okay, well, we're all going to teach our kids together. We're not just going to abandon somebody who is less comfortable doing this. We're going to support them, and if they want another like person in the room, then we'll see if we can get another person in the room.
Yeah, it's as always, we struggle with the well, who's gonna do it problem. Yeah, and in some ways, I kind of hope that my own more casual, informal approach spares me a little bit of that, while attempting to glean some of the benefits still from just being kind of a mentor. Because I guess that's the thing. I think most people are pretty capable of teaching a bit. They're at least capable of showing somebody else how to do something. It's pretty rare when that's just totally off the table. So, in the context of just that simple little interaction, you don't necessarily have to put a lot of pressure on yourself or on the kid. But it's kind of like doing like 25 push-ups a day. It doesn't really make you much stronger unless you do it consistently over time, in which case it'll actually make you a lot stronger. But the individual units of what you're building are not themselves terribly impressive. It's the trick of getting them into the aggregate, getting them to kind of build up. Yeah. But yes.
So back to the first topic we were talking about, the like trellis. What do you guys think are the rudimentary, fundamental things that everyone should be strongly encouraged to, if not pushed to understand for their functioning in our society or just functioning as a human?
Well, you can't really go that wrong with reading, writing, and arithmetic, but I would actually put an especially important premium on math, because I feel like our world is more math at this point than it is lexicography. We still have books, like reading and writing is still vitally important, because without those you can't really do math except in your head. That being said, we're kind of moving from a world where there's lots of abstract ideas and social constructs to a world where a lot of those same abstract ideas and constructs have now been rigidly implemented in some software running on a server somewhere, or some little piece of machinery that has tolerance X, Y, and Z, or oil that must be, you must have exactly X milliliters of this. Like, I feel like we have to deal much more with kind of those STEM-esque numbers and figures and equations.
Do you think
Because
that's
of course I might
your
be completely
bias
biased.
or
Oh
true?
yeah,
Like,
I'm almost certainly biased.
I I would contend that the essential part of math isn't the math but the logic, right? And
Yeah,
to learn that logic, there's some math that makes it a lot easier, right? The
hmm
adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing as pure math, I think that is essential. But then going anywhere beyond that, it's essentially applied logic to those core things. And whether you're in a STEM field or in alternative medicine or wherever you are, having the understanding of logical principles and being able to use them and not let them use you, I think is pretty corely essential to all of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's actually a good point. The underlying, there are some underlying kind of things even lower than math and literacy, and those are a little bit less uh, dichotomous.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but I would agree. I think those three concepts are probably in a bit of a stool situation, which is to say, if you take one of them away, you really don't have anything to stand on.
Yeah. Makes the other two far less useful.
Yes. So there's a little bit of a triumvirate there. And I'm fairly satisfied with that, because it's also, we have in some ways rederived the importance of a almost cliched educational paradigm. Even though it has its warts, even though our world is changing, the building blocks remain important.
Definitely.
Mastering the building block, singular, and it's in its own right and by itself, is not to be, is not to be discounted as unimportant or just kind of a bit of menial grudge work that you have to do.
So beyond the intellectual kind of data crunching ability, what do you think the trellis consists of? Because I think there are things that are not purely data that can be taught and should be taught to everyone.
Absolutely, and I think that's, admittedly, I think a lot of those lessons come from a weird combination of Socrates and Mr. Rogers, because a lot of the early, if we want to say like the more visceral kind of, maybe not intellectual or highfalutin, but just kind of the basic tips and tricks for being a human with a brain. I still catch myself forgetting to do things that Mr. Rogers taught me to do, like, be okay with who I am and try to be honest, and like all the little things that you totally throw by the wayside as soon as you get even a little bit stressed out or busy or just, adulting. But it's funny how I kind of keep coming back to what at the time I thought were like patronizingly stupid and obvious lessons, and now looking back go, yeah, and I still haven't gotten it. So room for improvement there. The other thing I wanted to say is the Socrates bit. Once you get to high school, you start, I think you're in a position, generally, it might happen in middle school, but you're in a position to start looking back at historical texts and whatnot, and reading them and understanding them and figuring out that they were humans with more or less a lot of the same kind of mental items on their map. And one thing I really liked from Socrates was the concept of an educated man is able to entertain an idea without accepting it. So I think that in combination with kind of this almost like the zen of just kind of self-confidence and self-realization of, in some ways, the Mr. Rogers is an anti-neurosis thing to stop the self-reflection when it gets too far. The Socrates bit is the part that is self-reflection, that can entertain ideologies, be they noble or be they, awful, and understand them without totally drinking the Kool-Aid.
So, okay. I don't know how long you want this to go, but we're almost at an hour here. I think I was thinking about the trellis, and I was like, oh, I don't know if I have anything to contribute to this, because I know what I want to say, but that's not like in the system of education. And then I realized I was thinking about the system of education as I have experienced it and known it. So I think what I would want to add to the trellis is that education goes beyond the classroom, and that it needs to extend out into the community. And we, like in high school, we had to complete X number of hours of community service. But I think that doing that in more of like a group setting of like, we're all going to go to the food bank and like get to know these people and help them for today, and we're going to do that every week for like this semester or whatever.
Sure.
We're going to help work on a park, like repainting some, like a building in a park or something like that. where you end up learning these like practical skills and seeing these pieces of reality in your community, and like what actually seeing your community for what it is, and all of the like good things and the harder things, and all of the people who are the younger people if you're working at a daycare to the people who are in an elder care.
Sure.
I think like having a specific part of the education system be dedicated to going out and doing that will
Mhm.
give you a better concept of community, like what your community is going through and what needs to be worked on, as well as providing like practical like skills like building something or fixing something or things like that.
I think a important component of that would be explaining why we're doing this in a way that isn't so you get into college. Because I think anytime you tell someone do community service so that you can internally, personally get a result, it changes this from I'm doing a project because there is value in this project to
Mhm.
I'm completing hours so I can get something else.
Yeah. Yep. I think oddly enough, I find it a bit easier to do things truly selflessly, maybe than sort of selfishly, insofar as and maybe you've experienced this, maybe it's just a dread of like failure or disappointment, but once you're doing something that is purely for somebody else's benefit, you're really not getting any, you know, uh, profit or anything out of that, or any goals that you have aren't really related to this, um, then the motivation equation seems to change, and you're no longer fighting yourself. You're doing it for somebody else, and yourself can kind of just be, you know,
Yeah.
ignored. Um, I don't know that. I don't know why that dynamic happens, but I feel like I have taken advantage of it in the past, and it's totally just one of those little mental tricks.
Yep.
But yes, I think as usual, it's always a process, and as with any process, education is made up of lots of small, little, boring steps that have to be repeated a lot of times before anything interesting happens. So, in
Yep.
some ways, you know, we don't get the dramatic change, but that's also good because sometimes we need time to evaluate it. And yeah, I'll say that's my thought. I'll leave it
Yep.
at that.
I think that's a good closing remark here.
Excellent.
Yeah. This is fun. I'll have another kind of set of seed videos. I think we're going to be talking about elderhood and what it means to relate to elders and what it means to be an elder and what it means to prepare for elderhood in our 20s when it's 40 plus years away.
We should probably
Definitely.
get some elders on the video chat.
We certainly could if anyone wants to come in and join. They are more than welcome. Yeah,
Sounds good.
I hope to see you in a couple weeks.
Yes, most definitely.